Nobody but me, a horror freak, would ever watch a movie like that.
Drive-By Movies, you're watching
Fresh Releases.
My name's Blaze.
And I'm James.
And this week, we're talking about the brand new film on Shudder, Stopmotion.
What happens when it takes on a life of its own?
Stopmotion is a feature-length debut from Robert Morgan. It's about a stop-motion animator who struggles to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother. So Shudder, it's been a while since we've checked out a movie from them, and every once in a while they throw out some just cool hits that everyone talks about, and then some sleeper hits that we'll talk about and nobody else ever brings up again. There's been some good ones. I forget one of the ones we watched last year that was really bizarre, but I enjoyed. I remember you weren't as into it as I was. It reminded me a lot of that film, and it kind of doesn't help that I don't remember the title. What's that?
Is that Censor?
Censor was the one. Thank you. I'm glad you remembered it. And then also movies like A Wounded Fawn. We both were big fans of that movie. Stop Motion is one of the creepiest films I have seen in quite some time. A lot of people have been saying that, and you know, it's not as huge of like a hit as other movies like Late Night with the Devil, or even movies like The Night, or Not the Night Comes for Us, or what's the name of that new Jason Voorhees movie? In a violent nature. In a violent nature is the one. Thank you. Even though you didn't get it, thank you. That helped me out and like kind of triggered my brainwaves into working properly. But Shudder's having a big year. You know, whether or not those are the movies that do it, I'm glad, and hopefully brings light to movies like Stop Motion. Because even though it's not a perfect film, it's a movie that I highly recommend. Is very one of a kind and doesn't utilize stop motion, not enough movies utilize stop motion. This movie does a great job of just making you feel really creeped out within these sequences and very uncomfortable, not just with the imagery but also the sound too. These bizarre grotesque moans throughout the movie you hear from this girl running away from the Ash Man is horrifying. So, you know, I was quite creeped out. What are your thoughts coming out of it?
Yeah, I have to say the stop motion in this film obviously was incredible. It was really cool to see all of those moments. And it was also cool to see like the behind the kind of scenes of like somebody creating a stop motion movie. But I think that's where they lost me, to be honest, was I felt like the kind of fabrication of this person creating stop motion. They're also creating it with their mom. It just, I don't know, it just didn't. And then there are studios in like an apartment building, but like the top floor. I don't know why, but none of it made sense to me. I was like, this just isn't working. And I think that because the stop motion elements in this film were so like good, it just made every time where I would say like a good 80 to 85% of this movie is just live action and there's no stop motion in the movie. And that's where the film really falters, is like all the stop motion's so good that when you go to parts where it's really just kind of hinging on this story, at times it feels formulaic, it feels cliche, where it was kind of losing me.
Okay, I see what you're saying, because there is the cliche drug tripping sequence within horror films. I forget the name of the director again of the movie Bliss, but I was afraid that this movie,
Begos.
Yeah, Begos, right? I thought this movie was going to go in that direction, and you know, if you're a fan of our show at all, we've reviewed a lot of his movies on here, and I never am a fan of his movies, but visually they're quite stunning though. And so, you know, Bliss being a Shudder original, I thought that this movie was going to kind of go in that direction with a drug tripping sequence, because that's kind of halfway through the movie. I really like the idea of her trying to, you know, get out of the shadow of her mother, but I didn't think that there was enough to display how popular her mother was as a filmmaker, because her mother was working on a film about a Cyclops, and the concept for that sounded interesting, but I found it hard to believe that style of animation and that kind of story would be popular for mainstream audiences, to where everyone was eager to see a finished product from her mother. And then, the daughter trying to go on her own, create this own film. Totally understand that, but I just have a hard time believing that like anyone would ever watch it. And then when her boyfriend kind of conveys that, during the climax of the movie, being like, what is this disgusting stuff you're working on, and confronts her about it, I'm like, I'm totally on his side, because I'm like, nobody but me, a horror freak, would ever watch a movie like that in general. Like, I wish, like, I see what you're saying, but but for me, it's just a minor complaint. Like, I wish they kind of would have tried to make it look more like Coraline or Nightmare Before Christmas as a film that the mother was working on, and then go into this bizarre, grotesque, the wax that they use on dead bodies, like, to create a human. Like, that's a cool concept, but I can see that going in for her film. But the idea of like just this creepy Cyclops also trying to be a mainstream movie from a popular filmmaker didn't really work for me.
I think it kind of ties along to the film recently released the Watchers, and that's directed by M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, and it feels very much kind of like a budget or cheap like M. Night Shyamalan movie. I think it's along the same lines of where she's directing a movie that is so similar to her mom's. She just assumes that there's already an audience there for it. But then at what point are you releasing something, which is this mini watcher review, but I felt like there's no one clamoring for that. I'm like, already getting, M. Night Shyamalan movies. I don't have room for like subpar M. Night Shyamalan movies. And I think he's capable of making those subpar movies himself. So I felt like that was probably the thought process here for Ella's film, was like, oh, it's got to be very similar to my mom's style. But yeah, like you said, the commercial appeal of her mom's style, it probably wouldn't have been there to make her as popular as it was for them to have, their own little their studio is literally just like was it literally a studio apartment or like a 1-bedroom?
It looked like it was a really big warehouse, like loft studio kind of, but yeah. It didn't seem like there were any separate rooms. They didn't really do anything to convey that within the movie, which is fine. I don't need that. And I guess it kind of works out when you understand how stop motion is, made in film. Like, I highly doubt it, like, a big filmmaker would ever be making a movie at their own private apartment. It could be done, of course, but, when the movie tries to display that the mother is like a well-known artist in the filmmaking field that works in stop motion, and has a big fan base. I mean, look at Ella, our main character. She's, trying to work a normal job, and then people are coming up to her being like, oh, how's your mom doing and stuff, like, love her work and everything. When you're displaying stuff like that, I'm like, they don't have like an office space that they do it in, or like, a warehouse or art studio that they're doing it. They just do it at their apartment, which is fine. The apartment looked nice too, but I agree with what you're saying though.
Yeah. So I would say like this film for me, I think it was entertaining, but it does fall along that same line of, I feel like I could name about, like, I'm a sucker for any movie that's like a behind the scenes look or, about filmmaking. But I feel like there's been a significant amount of specifically English movies that have been behind the scenes movie making, but also horror, that have just fallen entirely flat for me. And that's Censor, Barbarian Sound Studio. These all feel like they're made in the same vacuum somehow. Stop motion, of course. And I swear there's a couple more that I could fall along that same line of like, these seem like they're made by the same kind of groups of people. They got that same style. They all look the same, and they all just kind of miss the mark for me. They're just not that interesting. But yeah, for this one, I just think that having that stop motion in the film, like it is breathtaking. It's really well done. But then anytime that's not on the screen, you're like clamoring like, okay, like, can we get this moving along, especially when the subjects that they kind of deal with, the ideas of like, you know, you have nepotism, you also have like corporate art versus, you know, corporate / commercial art versus, you know, the artist and author vision. And yeah, it just felt like the Ella character kind of like going on her own path, but just really lost me with how, I guess, it's just really unlikable, especially with like, I understand you could dislike the fact that like corporate and commercial art is out there, let alone they're somehow using stop motion animation in this universe was a little far-fetched, let's be honest. But yeah, just having her really come out, and you know, whether she was solely under the influence of drugs, but yeah, it was just kind of cliche, but her being super aggressive, and you know, in that whole scene of like her kind of fighting back against corporate art.
Well, also this little girl throughout the movie too, I don't know if like she's part of a figment of the imagination. They might have conveyed that like earlier in the movie and I just might have overlooked it. I swear they kind of established that she was like the niece of like her boyfriend or something like that. I could be wrong though. I'm sure, you know, if you're going to leave a comment, let me know what I got wrong. But the whole movie though, I was just like, this little girl is bizarre as hell. And why isn't she talking to anyone about this little girl and the ideas that she's placing inside her head? You know, I'm fully admitting that there is probably something I missed out on her part of the story, just because like, yeah, I couldn't understand why she was kind of left out of the conversation of like people confronting her, being like, there's a dead animal that you're using, there's like you know, you're using gross old raw meat for these people for your stop motion film, like, and she didn't like think to be like, well, I'm doing what this girl said I should do, and I agree, it looks great and stuff. Granted, it's horrifying, but you know, the visuals I think are worth like checking out for this movie itself. But yeah, that was just another thing where I was just like, you know, why aren't they acknowledging the little girl that much more? And you know, like you know, towards the end, of course, like we see that more. There's like some supernatural elements and a lot of stuff where it's like it's in their head, and there's a lot of open for interpretation. But I thought it was a solid feature debut. Whether or not they continue to utilize stop motion in their future feature-length films, I'm not sure, but really enjoyed the stop motion that we saw here, and like it's images that were haunting me. I was like, I'm gonna have nightmares from this Ashman that I was seeing throughout the movie, so it really creeped me out. It was effective in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, whether this film was for me or not, it's not really the point. I'd like to see that Shudder's at least branching out and like providing filmmakers more opportunities to get their films seen on a wider scale. Like we've seen, you mentioned, there's already been at least 3 films I can think of that people have been talking about this year, and this was definitely one of them. So it was cool to kind of see that element. This was in theaters, I think earlier this year, like a lot earlier this year. But yeah, I like that Shudder's still providing filmmakers the opportunity to get their stuff seen in front of fans, especially because I think when it comes to all the streamers, Shudder's really the only one that's really like focused on genre filmmaking alone. Like, you know, you have all the other streamers making genre films as well, but is that film going to get to the right audience? On Shudder, you know that your film is going to get seen by people that should like it.
Right.
Maybe I wasn't the case in this film, but you know, a lot of people that watch this probably did enjoy it.
Before we close out though, I would like to send a huge complaint and like, you know, just like, you know, my thoughts on Shudder and Joe Bob Briggs's show. I mean, if you have Shudder, I feel like if you're a true horror fan, you love Joe Bob Briggs. Not saying that you can't be a horror fan if you're not a fan of him, but if you're a longtime fan of horror films, you love Joe Bob Briggs. And also, if you're a true horror fan, you already have Shudder. You're probably watching a lot of the new originals that are coming out every Friday on Shudder. I'm really sick of Shudder putting out new movies and then 2 years later, you know, it's a movie I've seen before, and then they do a Joe Bob Briggs episode on it. Or not even 2 years. Suitable Flesh just came out. We just reviewed it early at the beginning of this year, back in January or February, and they just released a Joe Bob Briggs episode on it. That's rad, but just like all of us have seen that movie. already. I don't want to rewatch it again with Joe Bob Briggs. I want him to talk about a movie that like just I haven't seen or nobody else has seen. And it's a great way to re-advertise your Shudder exclusives. But however, Shudder, you only get one movie a week that you're heavily pushing. We've already seen it. I don't need to see it again on Joe Bob Briggs' special. So reason why I'm complaining is because I know that Stop Motion, it's one of the more popular films that's out on Shudder right now because it's still new and just released on there. I know it was out in theaters earlier this year, but just got released on Shudder, I think this last month or so. But we're going to get the Joe Bob Briggs episode of it 4 or 5 months from now. I don't like that. I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but just like
we shouldn't. I mean, theoretically, we shouldn't because they've already shortened the Joe Bob season, sadly. So I don't think Shudder's doing too hot right now, sadly, because they had to reallocate resources. I know last year they did let go of a lot of people, so I think we're seeing the effects of that right now. I don't think the budget has been high enough for acquiring films for Joe Bob Briggs' movie show, but it feels like they're only picking Shudder films because it's just easier that way. They don't have to go license something else, and they did shorten it. His films aren't or his showcase isn't even double features this year. It's just single movies, so it kind of sucks. Honestly, I love the double feature format, and it sucks that that's the case. This season was also shortened by at least 50%, I think. So they used to have a season that wasn't all year round, but it was at least the whole summer, maybe even a little bit longer. And then they have all the holiday specials. They said they'll continue to do that, but it's just not going to be double features. So the season's half shorter if it's not double features,
I see your logic then. So, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. And it's probably the financially easier decision to make going with your exclusives. But, the Joe Bob Briggs episodes I appreciate are the ones where it's like the further along sequels of movies, like part 7 of the Amityville movies or, part 3 of The Exorcist. I never would have saw that movie if it weren't for Joe Bob Briggs. And, I'm glad for that. Roger Corman movies, Humanoids of the Deep and stuff. I feel like those movies can't be that hard for Shudder to be acquiring. So I like it when he talks about those style movies, like original drive-in style movies. And, I love Suitable, I wouldn't say I loved Suitable Flesh, but I highly enjoyed that movie. So it makes sense that he talks about it, but I just wish they'd kind of release it at the same time as the movie. So that way maybe you weren't interested in the movie, but if you're watching it 2 weeks after it's been out on Shudder, oh, well, too bad you like Joe Bob Briggs. Now you have to watch the movie. I just feel like that's more marketable. But, am I full of crap? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on Stop Motion and, in my opinion, on Joe Bob Briggs and Shudder? Let us know in the comments below because that's a great way to help support the show. You can also check it through our Amazon affiliate link in our description box below.
And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and click that notification bell to get all of our latest updates.
And speaking of updates, be sure to catch all our social media links down below. We got Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and our own personal letterbox accounts. That'll conclude this week's episode. Tune in next week for a brand new video.